Commander Tobler believed he'd seen it all, but today he's seen a Deathworld. Not just any Deathworld. No, the Deathworld. It hasn't been that long since Commander Tobler was given command of the GUV Breaking Dawn. Even so, the ease with which he and his crew adjusted to its amenities was natural. It felt as if he'd spent years aboard this vessel, despite it having only finished construction barely 3 months prior. That's Union Standard years and months, of course, as measured by the cosmological cycles of the Galactic Union's capital world. The Breaking Dawn is state-of-the-art, equipped with a new type of FTL drive that folds the fabric of space-time itself, creating a sort of shockwave in the fabric that propels the ship along faster than any vessel could hope to travel by more conventional means. Even hyperspace lanes pale in comparison. The crew have taken to calling the fold core a bang in a bottle, in reference to the theorized origins of the universe. More important than its sheer speed, however, is the fact that it is entirely different from conventional means. It used to take decades, even centuries, to get a drone out to a new system and a jump gate built. But the fold core is a self-contained FTL drive, meaning that it can go just about anywhere, with no jump gate needed. Commander Tobler is still a bit sore that he didn't win the competition. He could be out in deep space right now, traveling to entirely different galaxies. But alas, he was given the only slightly less enviable task of exploring the Keebler Void. The Keebler Void, of course, is the mysterious region of the galaxy where jump gate tunnels just plain don't work, and most shields aren't strong enough to survive the radiation bombardment of the unstable stars, especially not those of long-distance gate drones, which have to reserve years' worth of power to complete their mission. The scientific reasons behind it are ill understood, and it doesn't help that anyone who seems to know a thing or two about it constantly ends up arguing over esoteric terminology. Tobler has absolutely no idea what a quark is, let alone how reverberations in gravitational waves can cause it to become so unstable that even the more advanced tunneler gates can't transmit through it. Those quantum tunnel devices are known for their stability, and they just can't penetrate the stuff. For a while it was debated if it was even possible for planets to exist in the void, but a century ago, new forms of long-distance photon scans developed specifically for looking into the void confirmed the orbital shadows of worlds amongst the void's stars. Finally, a use for macro telescopes. Regardless, the first ship ever to traverse the void and live to tell about it is the GUV Breaking Dawn, commanded by Tobler Juwatsit Razowski III and his crew. All of them veterans of the Polynid genocides, complemented, of course, by the standard comportment of government eggheads. "I've got to say," Tobler complained, "this sure is boring."
What?"
exclaimed Dr. Bowskyle.
"How could you say that? The amount of data we've been able to gather is—"
"I don't care about your numbers and charts. I'm here to learn if there's life in this damnable void, and so far all we've found is lifeless rocks and gas giants, just like most everywhere else in the galaxy. So far, the only special thing about this stupid void is that I can't call my wife right now. None of us can. I haven't seen my daughter's face in 3 weeks." Tobler argued as the direction of his voice turned away from the scientist to vent at the blank view screen.
"Yeah,"
chimed in Corporal Yuntorn.
"I can barely sleep not knowing if either of my husbands are eating correctly. They're slobs. They wouldn't know a vitamin if I threw a supplement at them."
God, Yun, do you really have to rub your love life in our faces? I get it's a cultural thing, but damn, I wish I were so lucky. All I've got is an ex and 2 kids that hate my guts. I should be out there hitting the clubs right now, not doing this damned callback work. I earned my retirement on Estador 8. I deserve at least a vacation.
Corporal Myers whined, almost pathetically, if the gazes of the other bridge crew were anything to go by.
"Let's calm down, everybody. We're all stressed. We're all on the same ship here. This assignment is going to be a couple of years at least. Just be thankful the ship is so fast we've been ordered to give reports every month. Just 1 week to go. It won't be long," Counselor Namble said.
He was always pretty good at helping the crew stay level-headed, but even he is having trouble with this assignment. Despite this, he still avoided the temptation to join in the venting. Respectable. "All stop!" Commander Tobler cried. The ship lurched to a halt, though that is an artificial effect created to inform the crew of just such a sudden stoppage. Instincts can be hard to beat, so it's common for spaceborne vessels to instead co-opt them when it's convenient. A lurch like this is an easy way to convey exactly what's happened to everyone on the ship without so much as a single word. Most everything is secured, just in case actual combat happens, so there's no risk of anything getting knocked over. Commander Tobler appeared to be listening intently to something, a message from some other compartment of the ship. Despite being relatively new, the ship was massive, one of the largest science vessels ever constructed. A leviathan of polyorganic steel compounds and the most cutting-edge tech in existence. A slender, sleek tube with spherical compartments attached at various points along its hull, each of which is a massive, dedicated science lab unto itself. The fold-core drive allowed for a vessel of unprecedented size relative to its fuel capacity, and in this case, the sheer bulk of scientific equipment. There are multiple full-scale observatories on this ship, each of them synchronized to make use of overlapping sensory fields. And Tobler's men still found ways to fit extra guns on here, against the protests of the eggheads who tried, and failed, to get the commander to stop them. Never hurts to have a backup plan. "Are you certain, Doctor?" Every eye in the room steeled. Tobler would never refer to one of the scientists as Doctor, unless he was dead serious. "I'll patch you to the intercom. We all need this." After a handful of seconds, the intercom buzzed to life.
"Can I be... Oh, that isn't pleasant. Yes. I can hear myself, so I imagine you can hear me as well. Attention! Crew of the GUV Breaking Dawn, this is Head Science Direct...
"Skip the formalities, please," Tobler interjected.
"Oh, fine. We found it. We have identified a remarkable world in the nearest star system, the third body. It appears to contain incredible amounts of water, with preliminary scans placing the probability of survivable atmospherics at over 95%, although we would need to get closer to..."
The intercom was cut off, presumably by the commander, whose own voice instead echoed through the vessel's halls. "You heard him, boys and girls, and everyone else. We have a remarkable world. Why don't we humor him and get us some much-needed impromptu shore leave after we get those closer scans? Not that I expect the clubbing to be any good out in this backwater." The resounding cheer from the crew could be heard all over the ship. Even some of the scientists joined in. It took the Breaking Dawn all of an hour to divert from its original course. The fact that it could still use its scanning equipment even while inside a space-time shockwave is something even Tobler was, and still is, astonished by. Not that he really gets the how or why, but he figured if you can see straight in the middle of an explosion, that's pretty damn impressive. And this fold core was described as pretty much a miniature Big Bang, so yeah, damn impressive. What wasn't impressive was the collective gasp of despair and breaths of disappointment when the ship dropped off the shockwave at a static orbit not far from the world's upper atmosphere. The whole planet is just barely in full view, except it wasn't a pristine garden world like the crew was hoping. It had water. Lots of it. Too much, actually, and all of it frozen so white it looked like a giant planet-sized snowball. Even if the atmosphere is survivable, there's nothing pleasant to experience on an ice shelf. "Doctor, I thought you said this world had water, not ice," the commander intoned with strong annoyance.
"With all due respect, Commander, from multiple light-years away, it simply is not possible to determine with absolute certainty the matter state of..."
"Enough, Doctor. Just do your scans. When you're done, let us know and we'll move on." The commander slumped back into his command chair, while the rest of the bridge crew despondently returned to their mundane tasks, many of whom got up to take breaks now that the ship was no longer in motion. A few hours later, the commander considered the snowball before him, wondering if there was any walkable land on it. No, he thought to himself. Any planet that ends up gathering too thick an atmosphere or too much water like this one, there's probably nothing underneath that ice but sterile fluid. If there was, the planet would have to be classified as a...
Commander! The doctor's voice blared over the intercom, still an open transmission.
Dr. Gerard, before you say whatever you're about to say, you should know you are still on open transmit, the commander warned.
That's all right, Commander. I believe everyone should hear this. That planet has life!
A pregnant silence fell over the ship. Naught could be heard but the subtle creak of ship's interstructural plates as they flexed from the warmth of the nearby solar body. Stably, of course. The fibrous flora that does not bend will surely break, after all. Doctor, I don't know how much difference a few resilient microbes will...
No, Commander, not just microbes, Dr. Gerard sharply retorted.
Primitive animals, then? The commander shot back.
Sapience! That world! That Deathworld! Harbors sapient life! The scientist stated firmly.
Solid, liquid, or gaseous? The commander jokingly asked in a combination of poking jest and request for certainty.
What? Oh, never mind! This is no theory, Commander! We've detected signs of unnatural heat sources that cannot be attributed to volcanism. Electromagnetic readings from concentrations of metal that quite simply do not occur in nature, especially not in a world with this much water to rust and negate common magnetic materials. Although there is a vapor cover from a superstorm currently occluding it, this vessel's sensors are capable of filtering out the naturally occurring static strikes. There isn't just a primitive village down there. It's a city, the doctor calmly explained. A city made of metal.
With all due respect, Doctor, I find it hard to believe that anything could survive on that planet, let alone in the middle of a storm the size of a small moon. Speaking of which, have you seen the one orbiting this world? It's damn near the size of the planet itself. I may not be a scientist, but it doesn't take one to understand the implications of tidal forces. There is no way intelligent life could have evolved on that planet. Not even Class 13 Deathworlds are this lethal, and some of them have atmospheres made of poison, the commander argued, simply unable to believe the doctor's claims.
You are correct on one thing, Commander. This is no Class 13 Deathworld. In fact, given the readings I've recovered, and the new ones still coming in, the only classification I could give it is 14.
Dr. Gerard's tone was nothing short of incredulous, as if he was reading an inflammatory article aloud. Some of the crew could not hold back audible gasps, even as they looked at each other, confused. Doctor, it seems we have some people aboard who need to retake this mission's qualification exams. Could you enlighten us as to the implications of what you just goddamn said? Tobler commanded with a voice so laced with barely contained fury it made the crew sitting nearest his chair sweat. The doctor was silent for a moment, realizing that he roped himself into giving a brief extraplanetological lecture.
Well, as I'm sure most of you know, Deathworld is the term used to classify life-bearing worlds with extreme conditions. Life-bearing specifically because there is no end to the horrifying dangers that our universe can produce. But for most of these dangers, life is impossible. Deathworlds are special because they harbor life despite these horrors. From extreme gravity to toxic atmospheres, unpredictable and deadly weather, or even non-intelligent life hyper-evolve to such degrees that render them some of the most dangerous life forms in existence. The number by which a Deathworld is classified refers to the number of these conditions present. If a condition is significant or dangerous enough to pose an existential risk to the evolution of sapient life, that is added to a given Deathworld's number. High gravity is by far the most common, with most Class 1 Deathworlds being little more than a particularly large and or dense terrestrial world.
So, Doctor, Tobler sardonically asked, please enlighten us. What are the 14 existential threats on this snowball? Despite the antagonization, Gerard did as instructed.
First off, It is indeed large and dense enough to sport a dangerously high gravity. Most sapient life forms would find the world lethal to stand upon without protective equipment to support their frames, and even then they would need to take pulse-boosting supplements to ensure their hearts do not give out under the pressure. The suits will also need to be double pressure layered to ensure that the wearer's internal organs do not implode.
Some of the crew gagged from the very thought. Yuntorn shivered.
Next is the atmosphere. Although estimates placed it at 95% likely to be survivable, the vapor cover occluded the lethally high concentrations of pure oxygen. Special filters will be needed to prevent hypoxia. The atmosphere also contains two other lethal conditions. The next is also lethally high concentrations of CO1, 2, and 3, two of which are far more than high enough to be considered ironclad signs of primitive industrialization, which makes the likelihood of its current state being natural unlikely.
The commander was shocked. Even his often stoic expression broke at this. You mean to say they made this world Class 14, Doctor? Why the would they do that?
I do not know, Commander, Gerard responded. Nevertheless, may I go on?
The commander loosed a long, drawn-out sigh. It's unfortunately important for the crew to know the dangers of the world they're faced with. A discovery like this requires extensive exploration, including surface teams. Everyone has to be precisely aware of the dangers. But perhaps it's best not to broadcast them over an open intercom. Besides, the doctor said that reports are still coming in. Maybe he is exaggerating. No, Doctor, you may not. Continue scanning and call me down when you're done and have absolute certainty. That way I can compile a report with the relevant details for the crew to read. It's time we do what we came here for, Tobler ordered. The rest of those at their stations aboard the bridge can be heard in various states of relief. No one was looking forward to Gerard's excited descriptions of hell itself. 1 Union Standard week passed, specified now because this Class 14 Deathworld's timetable is significantly faster than normal. From the looks of it, about 4 times faster, though there's no telling what sense of time sapience on such a hellhole would even have. Commander Tobler was in his quarters when a knock came at the door. Come in, he invited. One of the ship's few privates stepped in. Private An Mintain, barely 20 years old, Union Standard. By the standards of whatever people lived on that snowball, he'd be 80. Commander Tobler shuddered to think that this young, naive soul might be considered a grizzled veteran by anyone's standards. He offered a salute and spoke in a well-drilled tone.
Sir, Private Mintain reporting, sir.
Ah, Tobler replied. Private Mintain. At ease. What do you have for me?
Sir, Head Science Director Gerard has requested your presence, sir,
he answered. Finally. Tobler knew he'd told the doctor to gain absolute certainty, but he was beginning to wonder if the good doctor had finally met his match. Seems there was nothing to worry about, or perhaps there is. In any case, the commander is about to find out. Tobler stood, not bothering to change out of informal attire, and commanded the young soul, Lead the way, Private. The trip to the 3rd Observatory section didn't take long. The breaking dawn is state-of-the-art, and exceptionally well laid out, very much unlike the labyrinthine corridors of the older military vessels that commanders like Tobler have spent years on. Despite this, Tobler is very happy to have this vessel. It's nice to have nice things, even if they're not traditional. Easy to traverse circular hallways rounding the edges of the ship, with access doors for each section at each of the 8 standard planar points. Far superior to the ugly, bulky square pathways, and far more space-efficient. The shape also allows the ship to go into a sort of low-power mode by turning off the artificial gravity and replacing it with a centripetal force via spinning. It's a bit awkward since the force decreases near the central chambers, and also that felt gravity reverses, making the floor the ceiling, but it lets the ship conserve incredible amounts of power in emergencies. The pair arrives, after barely a scant few minutes, at the 3rd Observatory. Dr. Gerard is already there, waiting for them.
Ah, Commander Tobler! Thank you for accepting my request. After the initial reports, I've gotten less than stellar welcomes from the rest of the crew. My very brief analysis has caused stress among them," the doctor intoned, his voice cold and calculated.
"Damn straight, Doctor. What you described would be enough to traumatize children. But all the same, I take it this means you have even more bone-chilling news for me?" the commander inquired.
"Yes and no. More news, though whether or not it is bone-chilling is up to you. As you know, I am unfamiliar with such concepts," Dr. Gerard explained.
"Yes, I am aware of Androshan's complete and utter lack of a fear response. Perks of evolving on a paradise planet, I suppose," Tobler mused.
"Curse, more like it. Take my people away from our perfectly safe home, and suddenly the inability to recognize danger becomes a very distinct disadvantage. I had to pass extensive tests to prove my cognitive abilities sufficient to supplement my lack in this area. Cognitive understanding of danger to replace instinctual fear. Even so, I am restricted by protocol from straying too far from my quarters. Even meeting you at the door here is a risk," Gerard, still all too coldly, elaborated.
"So you do live in the lab. Damn, there goes 10 creds," Cobbler complained, shocked. The head science director offered a look of confusion.
"Sir?"
"Sorry, Doctor. I suppose I should have known better than to bet on common sense. Anyways, let's head inside before anyone in the crew gets too curious. Private, good work. Back to your station," Tobler ordered.
"Aye, sir,"
Private Mintain responded, before turning and heading back down the hall. The doctor and the commander ventured down the steps, an identical set of which existed inverted on the ceiling of the corridor, just in case that aforementioned emergency measure was ever used, to enter the deeper portions of this section of the ship. The access stations for the external sensory devices. The third observatory, including not just the new long-distance photon scanners, but also an array of graviton detection equipment, electromagnetic field emitters and transceivers, and a whole bunch of other devices Commander Tobler did not recognize. The eggheads sure did have a lot of fancy toys, and there are 4 sets of these on the Dawn. Also, they can double-check, cross-reference, and coordinate their stuff to create more advanced data sets. State-of-the-art indeed. According to the schematics and the training procedures, the observatory sections specifically can independently separate and remain operational for up to 2 Union Standard years. Long enough for this incredibly fast ship to deposit each of them at vastly distant locations to further amplify the effectiveness of their overlapping sensory fields for long-term observation. Although that particular function won't see much use on this mission, it was designed for the scanning of entire galaxies, not individual star systems. Damn that lucky bastard Kyaku. Tobler knew he shouldn't have had that last drink before the day of the competition. "So, Doctor, report. What exactly are we looking at?" the commander spoke, bidding the genius Androsian before him to speak.
"Yes, very well. As I stated at the initial briefing, the first 4 existential threats are the high gravity, and no less than 3 different lethal atmospheric conditions. 2 toxic, 1 due to air pressure, the latter of which I was not able to elaborate upon," the doctor began, eyeing the commander for permission to elaborate. The commander reassured him.
"You're safe here, Gerard. The crew report will only include the essentials. You can be as verbose as you feel you need to. I can take it."
Gerard continued excitedly. "Thank you, Commander. The air pressure, although not as high as that of the second planet in the system, which, while deadly, certainly does not harbor life and thus does not classify as a death world, is still astronomical, equivalent to being over 100 meters deep in the oceans of more typical planets. Even without the force of gravity, the pressure alone would be enough to cause most typical life forms to suffer severe damage to fragile sensory organs and likely circulatory or respiratory failure. In other words, if one were to drop from a relatively safe portion of the atmosphere with nothing more than an air filter and some thermal wear, they would die long before hitting the ground. Without the aforementioned equipment, before even making the jump. Suffice it to say that for any form of ground-based expedition, The crew will need state-of-the-art suits, which can thankfully be synthesized with the ship's fabricators. Rather obviously, the fifth condition is the incredibly low ambient air temperature, well below the freezing point of water in nearly all places on the planet, except only a handful of warm spots near the equator, if indeed such temperatures could even be called warm. Wind speeds in most areas are also rather high, which in combination with the general temperature results in sharpened crystallized precipitation capable of maiming or fatally injuring those without proper protection. Even without the wind, the temperatures are low enough to result in larger solidified crystals which, under the force of the world's high gravity, results in similarly lethal hail. The wind patterns themselves are chaotic and close to unpredictable in the long term, but more importantly, frequently result in large-scale storms such as the one currently visible from orbit. Needless to say, all of the previous conditions are intensified during these storms, and are joined by frequent naturally occurring static discharges on the order of 300 million volts, enough to vaporize you before you could even know you were struck, and together all of this makes the sixth condition. The suits will also need conductive layers to redirect such strikes, but it is unlikely that such measures could survive more than a handful, and just one of these storms produces thousands over its lifetime. Granted, thousands of strikes spread out over an incredibly large area.
The commander interrupted. Large area? Doctor, that storm covers nearly half the goddamn planet. Gerard made a poor attempt at hiding his annoyance with the commander's interruption, but said nothing about it, instead preferring to continue.
The seventh condition is the radiation, which I've confirmed is not a temporary residual of nuclear warfare, though it does mean that this world's current conditions are, in fact, naturally occurring. This radiation appears predominantly at the poles and spreads throughout the rest of the atmosphere, though the size of the storms seems to fluctuate on an incredibly long timescale. Currently, they encompass nearly half the planet, a quarter up and down from each pole. But my readings suggest that during warmer periods, and yes, this planet does have warmer periods, they can shrink to be visible from only very near polar regions. In any case, most forms of life do not even need to see these formations to suffer radiation burns. The eighth condition is the sapients themselves. In standard fashion, sapients tough enough to evolve on a Deathworld of any class are often very dangerous and powerful compared to typical species and are themselves an existential threat, both to other sapients and to themselves. It is rare for societies of them to survive very long. The ninth condition is drawn from clear observations of thousands of impact sites on the planet's abnormally large moon, which is another of the conditions I will get to later, as well as on the surface of the world itself. Statistically, it receives an extinction-scale impact every so often. The 10th condition was suspected due to the large satellite, but confirmed recently via a seismic probe. There are frequent, powerful, and violent tectonic instabilities that result in lethal earthquakes and severe amounts of volcanism, which also likely result in extinction-level events every so often, and could be the source of the world's current atmospheric conditions, and, of course, seismic floods, which are often mistaken for tidal waves.
The commander held up one of his 4 hands to silence the doctor briefly as he found a seat. He hadn't thought he'd need one, but this world was terrifying beyond measure, and he needed a way to rest his head in his hands as he considered how the hell he was going to write a report that didn't give his crew nightmares and scare out of anyone he had to send down there for the expedition. Perhaps he wouldn't. Today was the last day before the report. Maybe they could request support for this one. Once the commander took a seat, the doctor continued nonchalantly, as if he wasn't listing some of the most dangerous conditions in the galaxy, knowing full well that people were going to be sent down there.
The 11th condition also comes from the seismic probe, which simultaneously took a core sample. That one sample alone identified no less than 30 different pathogens.
The commander shot up. Pathogens? Please tell me.
Yes,
Gerard answered immediately, allowing the commander to return to his seat.
All necessary quarantine protocols are in place. The probe sent its data remotely and is currently in a safe micro-orbit around the vessel. None of the microbes have come aboard, nor will they. In any case, although the probe identified 30, It is highly likely, given the world's size and shocking variety of biomes, despite the temperatures, that hundreds or even thousands of pathogenic species exist. This, in combination with its poisonous atmosphere, makes it almost certainly the single most toxic planet in recorded history. Nothing lives down there that hasn't been living there for millions of years. Speaking of which is condition number 12. As expected, beneath the ice and in some areas above it exists a wide variety of hyper-evolved species that have survived the world's myriad dangers and repeated extinction events, resulting in monstrous animals as or more dangerous than most military weapons. Strength, speed, stamina, toxins, poisons, natural weapons. You name it, it exists down there somewhere. Even the plants have, in many cases, developed lethal defense mechanisms, especially in one of the cold but relatively un-icy southern continents.
Plants, Doctor? Tobler interjected. There are plants in that hellhole?
Yes, Gerard replied. Quite hardy ones at that, most of which bloom only once every solar cycle. Scans also indicate Leviathan-class life forms in the deepest portions of the ocean, though it is unlikely that they ever leave their abyssal habitats. Nevertheless, it also means that deep ocean scanning is dangerous beyond measure and will likely never be conducted.
Gods above, the commander prayed. The head science director ignored him and continued.
The 13th condition is the abnormally large satellite. Though we cannot discern how it came about, as it is far too large to be a capture, the sheer size of this moon is enough to generate severe tidal forces. The unstable tectonics are, of course, one of the results, as are the chaotic wind patterns further instigated by its orbit and severe floods that often accompany the superstorms. The 13th condition, in technicality, however, is the penultimate cause of the current ice age. Do you recall when I said warmer period?
Yes, Doctor, I do. Tobler intoned, at this point resigned to the doctor's hellish descriptions.
While I began with several theories as to how this snowy planet emerged, including nuclear annihilation, volcanic activity, pollution, and even asteroid impact, ultimately all of these are dubious. I considered that perhaps a combination of them was the ultimate cause and began to investigate the precise volcanic triggers when I discovered it. As it turns out, the tidal forces generated by the abnormally large satellite, in combination with the world's abnormally fast rotation for a life-bearing planet, also result in subtle but significant disruptions to the world's magnetic field. These disruptions are, in part, responsible for the radiation anomalies at the poles, but more significantly build up over very, very long periods. Eventually, this results in a global magnetic pole reversal. Essentially, the north and south poles will suddenly snap and exchange places. This sudden shift causes every magnetic substance on the planet to spontaneously reverse polarity, and the vast majority of the world's core is solid magnetic material. This causes an extreme disruption in the convectional currents of its molten mantle, and thus worldwide volcanic events. This pumps, frankly, mind-boggling amounts of particulates into the atmosphere and results in a rampant greenhouse effect.
The commander looked up, confused. Greenhouse effect? I may be no scientist, but even I know that means warmer, Doctor, not colder. Head Science Director Gerard sighed for once.
Yes, warmer at first, but as the temperatures climb, the oceans evaporate and the glaciers shrink, resulting in abnormally high amounts of atmospheric water. The polar water latches onto the atmospheric particulates and generates inconceivable amounts of cloud cover. Said cover then causes a sharp and dramatic decline in temperature, which then causes the polar ice caps to grow at a breakneck pace, which then causes light to reflect off the ice caps and further push away heat from the world, resulting in a chain reaction. As the clouds recede, the glaciers replace them until the entire world is frozen over. In the meantime, superstorms like the one you see right now form out of the global cloud cover and level anything and everything on the surface. Meanwhile, toxic atmospheric chemicals get pulled into the oceans by the precipitation and, at least in theory, suffocate any life down there, though this world's aquatic ecologies have somehow found a way to survive this. Nevertheless, it is a regularly scheduled extinction-level event to join the other two. Happens once every few 100,000 of its solar cycles, every 100,000 or so Union Standard years. In other words, well short enough a recurrence to, in theory, prevent the evolution of sapient life in general, let alone give them enough time to develop space-age technology to escape the disaster. Coupled with the impacts, volcanism, and highly dangerous wildlife, it is a wonder how these sapients ever came to be.
Commander Tobler sighed and stood back up. He began to pace around the lab, stopping just before the viewport to once again find himself considering the hellish snowball before him, and the gargantuan storm tearing across its surface. Amazed by the notion that anything could live down there at all, let alone build a city capable of weathering such a thing. They probably never even saw it coming. As the doctor said, it would get warmer at first before the snap. To them, it probably seemed like a subtle warming. Even if they had thought it was caused by their technological development, he doubted they would stop advancing because of it. Caught by surprise, and yet they persisted. But even so, one question remained. "And Condition 14, Doctor? From the sounds of it, this Deathworld is like every other one in the galaxy put together in a bag and shaken like my favorite drink. It even has this unique satellite. What else could there possibly be?" Tobler asks, steeling himself for the final nightmare that Gerard has for him.
Well, this one will likely be somewhat contentious, but given that we are the first to truly explore the Keebler Void, I think our expertise on the matter will solidify it without too much academic issue. That is to say, I believe the Keebler Void itself to be Condition 14. It was already known that the stars within the void are the most unstable in the galaxy, for reasons that are still unknown. What is certain, however, is that every star in this region suffers from frequent and violent solar weather that often shoots literally astronomical jets of charged particles at its orbital bodies, bathing them in highly radioactive matter and energy. For most worlds, this alone makes life impossible, but this world's extraordinarily strong magnetic field is not dissimilar from the one employed by the Breaking Dawn whenever we hunker down to weather one of these solar storms. Even so, it is not as advanced and over an incredibly large area. Furthermore, due to its proximity, the long-term buildup of radiation is severe. It is likely that this radiation results in a dramatically higher mutation rate in even small microbial life forms, let alone the cells of macroorganisms. For such macroorganisms, this means that their genes degrade at a frighteningly fast pace. It is unlikely that anything on that world is capable of living longer than a handful of Union Standard decades. Simpler life forms may prove more resilient, possibly immortal for certain definitions, but complex and especially terrestrial animals certainly suffer from pitifully short lifespans, though for most of them, it is unlikely that they would die to, for lack of a better term, age, than to one of the other myriad dangers. For the sapiens, however, who likely found ways to dissuade such dangers with technology, rapid radiation-induced aging, cancer, and genetic defects built up over generations of mutation must plague them incessantly. Even I cannot imagine how a society where no one lives beyond the age of 25, if they can even retain higher functions past 17, could even operate at levels more advanced than simplistic tribal hierarchies.
The doctor took a very long breath.
This concludes my report, Commander.
100, Doctor. Tobler corrected him. Gerard asked, confused.
Excuse me?
Lives beyond 100. Their planet rotates 4 times faster than High Union. To them, they never live past 100. They probably start breaking down at 68? Sooner even? These people. They live faster than we do. 4 times faster. Maybe that's how they survived. Their lives are too short to care about long-term consequences, so they focus on living in the now. They focus on supporting the next generation. Gods, I cannot imagine how fast they have to reproduce just to avoid extinction, if they ever get off that planet, Tobler explained.
Unlikely. Chances are, by the end of this ice age, the classification will be reduced to 13 due to the extinction of the local sapient population. I doubt, Gerard retorted, but was interrupted.
They're alive, Doctor. They've survived to this point. If they were going to go extinct, they would have done so by now. If they could survive long enough to build metal cities amidst fatal toxins, lethal monsters, and cataclysmic weather, I see no reason why they couldn't weather this. What's the usual estimate for that kind of technology? 200,000 years Union Standard? Even with accelerated lifespans, they could only learn so quickly. If anything, that might slow them down. To have metal cities, they'd have to have survived 200,000 years at least. You said that ice age happens once every 100,000 or so, which means the fact that they are here at all is proof they've survived it before, with even less technological advantage. They'll be here, Doctor, Tobler stated confidently, as if hedging bets on a confident racing Ruthern. They're here to stay.
You don't get it. Humans aren't like you and me.
The doctor's eyes were large orange stalks sprouting out from his small four-armed body.
You don't want a human fighting in the arena. Trust me on that.
His name was Vamez, and he was desperately jumping from one operation table to the next, trying to save two different and poor creatures that had just made their way out of the arena. He was covered in smatterings of various blood and guts. The work and brutality had painted his distraught, hole-ridden gown into a kaleidoscope of alien biology.
I've only seen a human once, and I've got no desire to see one again.
Vamez was speaking to a large and shadowy alien. It was a brutish, hairy thing, and it watched the doctor bounce from medical disaster to medical disaster, clawed hand up close by its mouth, and demeanor careful. Its voice prowled out from its mouth.
The Imperium wants one.
I get that.
Vamez shook his head, all four hands deftly and frenetically at work.
But you're not listening to me. Humans are not creatures that should be messed with.
There's rumors of one in the sector.
The creature's name was Maleth.
They want it.
You're not listening to me.
He snapped a bone back into place, the creature responding with a painful groan.
Those humans, they...
Vamez trailed off, eyes and thoughts being carried off. The creature raised an eyebrow.
Yes, Doctor.
He sighed, wiping off his hands, as his eyes sadly recognized that one of the creatures he was working on had died. No matter how many times he'd seen death, it hurt him every time.
I was allowed to study the human I met.
He wiped blood out of his eyes and walked back over to the one creature still fighting, himself rallying the energy to not stop until it did.
They have something inside of them, Maleth. Something different than what you and I have.
Maleth laughed.
Isn't that why we have you, Doctor? Because all of these creatures have different insides.
Vamez's hands were tired, languished, yet they still moved on the twitching creature with rapid speed.
Maleth, they have electricity in them. I don't know how else to describe it, but the stimuli in their heads, the wires coursing through their flesh, it all uses electricity. Do you get that, Maleth? Do you get what I'm telling you? The very basic building blocks of their intellect is different than anything we've ever seen.
Doctor, why should I care about what a creature is made out of? The only thing the arena wants to see is those insides ripped apart and thrown onto the sand and dirt. I would only care if you told me there were no insides to be ripped.
No, it's not that simple, I'm telling you. You do not want a human in the arena. It won't go like you think.
His hands dropped beside him, voice going wayside with it. The small, torn animal in front of him had finally stopped twitching, stopped moaning. It was dead. Vamez sighed and put a somber hand on its stitched stomach.
I'm sorry.
Maleth smirked.
Well, maybe I shouldn't be trusting a doctor who can't even do his job.
He turned around, heading back up the stone stairs with casual, lazy steps.
The question was just one of curiosity, Doctor. Just be ready to actually do your job if we get one.
Do I have a choice? He gestured to his beaten, ragged operating room, his prison. A small, sinister smirk echoed down from the stairs.
No.
Guess what? Oat leaned back in his seat and watched the stars fly by in his rickety spaceship. I've got something mighty rare, boss. You won't believe it. The opposing voice was monotone and unamused. We told you, Oat, if the creatures can't talk or show suffering, people don't want to watch them fight in the arena. Oh, don't worry, boss. Oat was a fat, purple-skinned alien who somehow always found a way to laugh and smile, even while dragging creatures off in chains to be killed or maimed in the grand arena. He was still grinning. No, don't worry, boss. This one can talk. It can talk, and you'll like the way it talks, boss. The operator's dullness and uncaring could kill.
All right, well, make sure whatever this thing is, make sure you get it to the pits by end of cycle.
No, for real. Oak kicked up his feet on the pilot console, wiping crumbs off his stomach with large, careless swipes. For real, boss, I got me a human. That's right, real as can be. A real deal human, boss.
What?
The operator's voice suddenly became ecstatic.
You have a human in your cargo?
Here. Oat slapped his knee. See, told you, boss. I told you wouldn't be able to believe it.
Listen right now, you purple-skinned Nimrod!
The operator jolted alive, voice buzzing and desperate as he scrambled out his words.
If you are kidding, even for a moment, even the slightest moment, Oat, then the Imperium will have you arrested, and you'll never be seen again. Is that clear, Oat? Is that getting through that fat skull of yours?
I ain't lying, boss. Not lying one bit. Was trying to grab me another one of those mossy folk, the furry ones that always fight like hell, and wouldn't you know it, a damn human is there. I'm telling you, boss, it was something. It was really something.
So you say, Oat. Oat the massive. Oat the lazy. Oat the sloth. Oat the sluggish.
I get it, boss.
You got a human all on your own?
Sure as hell.
Ha!
Oat could hear the operator move and jump from his excitement.
Oh, man, they're going to lose it. They're going to lose it, Oat. We're going to get paid so much for this.
Yep, sure as hell.
Oat, do you know when the last time a human fought in the Grand Arena was?
When's that, boss?
Never!
He screamed it, his smile radiating through the radio.
No one has ever been able to catch one. The Imperium have been dying to get their hands on one.
Well, he let out a large, rumbling burp. They better be dying like hell to pay for one, too.
I'm going to call the pits. They've got to know this is coming. Oh, man, they're going to prepare the largest event ever around this thing. You just get over here as fast as possible, Oat.
Yeah! He stretched and yawned, causing his small chair to squeak under his moving mass. I'm getting there. He was casual and laughing, yet something in his mind had begun to irk him. The operator hadn't asked, nor would it have mattered, as Oat would never have told him the truth. But the human he found, it didn't fight. He just gave himself up. There was no epic, horrifying battle like people had always said there would be with a human. He just let Oat tie him up, not saying a word. It was going to make him rich, so Oat didn't complain, but he still couldn't shake that feeling of, why? He shook his head as his small ship tumbled through the stars, catching up to light speed and heading straight into the heart of the Imperium. While he was traveling, a wave had made its way across the intergalactic empire. All around, in the backwater stations and in the large metropolis, in the god-forsaken hellholes and in the rich utopias, the word got out. A human captured for the Grand Arena. The Grand Arena was a massive, ornate structure that floated on a meteor. It was set in a controlled orbit around the Imperium's capital planet, and the pits were the prisons located in the meteor's shadowy underbelly. By the time Oat finally arrived, proud and thumping off of his ship, a crowd had gathered. It was usually a ratty and rejected place, only slavers and slaves making their way through its filthy streets. Now, though, it was a bustling scene.
What is this?
Oat walked along the thin metal docks of the shipyard, trudging along and sneering as dozens and dozens of creatures clambered about from behind ropes and chains. They screamed and yelled to see the human, who Oat hadn't even got out of the cargo yet.
You all just here for the little guy?
Two black-suited, slick, and serpent-like creatures came up. They were careful things, green-scaled and with flicking tongues. Their movements seemed as if they were one animal instead of two. One would duck its head, and the other would follow. They would walk in unison and rhythm that only heart and hand could maintain.
"Hello,"
one wisped out, bowing its head.
"The Oat?"
Oat blinked, still confused by the sudden excitement and attention.
"Well, yeah, that's me."
"We're representatives of the Imperium,"
the other said with a sway of its head.
"We are here to make sure the human is safe." "Yes,"
the other hissed.
"He must be inspected."
"Inspected?"
Oat backed up to his ship, covering the entrance with his massive body.
"What do you mean?"
"We understand your hesitation,"
they both bowed.
"but we assure you, we are not here to take your prize, just to make sure that the Imperium is going to get what it is being promised."
One turned around and gestured to a troop of 12 fully armored, heavily gunned, and dreadfully serious soldiers heading their way in formation, clearing the crowd with their march.
"They are here to protect your bounty."
Oat shifted on his feet, looking around with skittish eyes.
"Protect it, huh?"
He adjusted the bounty hunter vest around him and scrunched his nose.
"Think I can take care of that."
"Yes, yes."
They were always dancing their heads side to side.
"Yes, we are sure, but we must also march it to the doctor. He will confirm it is what you say it is."
"Confirm?"
Oat puffed up his chest.
"What, you can't just look at the thing? It's a damn human. I said it's a human, and I ain't no liar. It's a damn human."
The two snakes bowed deeply.
"Yes, of course, of course. But," one spoke quickly, "it is a precaution. The Imperium is a careful institution." "Very careful," said the other. "Now come, enough of this talk. Bring out the human."
Oat looked around. The chaos and mayhem had been sucked away by those words. Like a freezing plague, the mention of the human brought the crowd to a still, almost eerie hush. More guards arrived and rallied into a large circle around the docks, and the snakes looked at him with yellow, piercing eyes. It was a moment filled with sulfur and tension, and Oat twisted his mouth as he understood that it was his move next.
"All right,"
he nodded.
"All right, yeah, let's bring this thing out."
A horrible thought struck him. He recalled back to the capture, to his original suspicious run-in with the human. It made him uneasy, on guard even, and he was suddenly happy for the large support of firepower around him. Even then, though, if that would have to happen, if it did get nasty, he had a feeling that those Imperium freaks wouldn't be too careful to spare him in the ensuing gunfire. Oat turned to his cargo, placing his hand on the door and taking a deep breath. The handle twisted, and a small, airy hiss crawled out. Every eye searched for a view. Every creature clawed and clamored for a look. Oat opened the large door, and there, perfectly still, just as he had placed him before, was the human.
"Oh,"
one of the snakes said almost instinctively.
"There it is."
Oat coughed and pulled up his pants.
"All right, buddy."
He spoke to the human with much more hesitation than when he had captured him.
"Time to go, bud. Gotta get you to the doctor or something."
The human was a young man. He was small and of a nimble build. He had medium, dirty blonde hair that slightly covered brooding eyes, and carried an air as if he was always at a funeral. His hands and feet were tied, and his mouth had a crude rope tight around it so he couldn't speak. Oat had been afraid to hear him talk.
"I'ma let you do the walking, buddy."
He cut his feet, freeing the small man. Oat stopped when raising up from his feet, staring at the man's bound mouth. He thought for a long moment, both curiosity and a want for answers tearing at him.
"Tell you what, old buddy,"
he tried to keep his cool, lazy demeanor.
"Let's let them teeth show too. Audience loves a good biter."
He snipped the rope, letting it drop by the human's neck. Yet even with both leg and tongue being freed, the human hadn't moved. He just sort of stared at Oat, a haunting, unsettling stare. It caused Oat to back up and discreetly brush a chill from his arms.
Come now,
the snake seethed with excitement.
Let's get the human out to the doctor. There's so much that is yet to be done.
Oat's fist tied to knots.
"He ain't leaving my side, not till I get what's due to me."
Yes, of course.
They both nodded.
Of course, let us go.
He took a big breath and swallowed.
"All right, buddy, let's go."
The human stood up. The speed and sudden snap of his movements made even the snakes jump, and that small bolt of activity was just enough to relight the fires of tension from the crowd. A roar took over the area, and the scene suddenly became a sea of clawing aliens, of desperate fans crying to get a better view of the human. Guards kept people back, and an alley of bodies formed, flanked and held up by the tall, black-armored brutes. The pits had never seen such a sight. The trash place had in itself turned into an arena spectacle.
"Stars above!"
Oat was in disbelief as he led the human away. The snakes were close behind, all accompanied by multiple guards. He kept looking back at the human, almost as if he was worried that at any moment, or within any blink of the eye, he'd be gone. But each time he was still there and as stoic and unspeaking as ever, just dutifully, if not eerily, following. Though one look, in a moment so quick that Oat almost wasn't sure that it even happened, he looked back at the human, and instead of seeing his head down, instead of that ragged hair swaying and guarding his face, instead the human was staring right at Oat. It was unmistakable, and it wasn't just a casual movement of the eyes. It was a deep, electric stare, a glare that might as well have been two roaring stars blinding him with their screaming light. The human's face showed sadness, a deep and rooted sadness. Yet Oat had seen that plenty of times. That's not exactly what concerned him. This was a different kind of sorrow. The human wasn't pitying itself. No, Oat knew that look. For some awful, unknown reason, the human looked sad for everyone else, as if it was looking at some terrible accident. Then, without a doubt in Oat's mind, he saw a tear form on the edge of its eyes. It went away quickly, but Oat had saw it, and all of a sudden, Oat realized that he was scared shitless. Vamez had been hearing the commotion for hours now. From his little cell, he could see and hear people running to and fro. He could smell the sweat and stress in the air. It was like the pits, usually a horrid and dreary place, had suddenly become a seat to the Imperium's greatest stars and diplomats. All he could do was rub his forehands down the length of his pants and try not to stress out too much. Suddenly, familiar steps came from down the hallways. For a moment he was stunned. Then, when his eyes confirmed who it was, he almost had no words.
Oat?
He blinked and rubbed his eyes.
You are the one who captured the human?
The big man was obviously uncomfortable, and he was surrounded by an insane throng of guards and attendees. Vamez even recognized the twins, the pair of snake brothers who'd garnered such an awful reputation among the Imperium elites. Oat shifted on his feet. Then, with a small sidestep, he revealed the prize behind him. Vamez's heart sank when he saw that it was indeed a human, and not just a human, a damn strange-looking one.
Stars!
He cleared some room for the small group of attendees to squeeze in. A cleaning crew had come through recently and deep-cleaned all of the stained blood and loose organs.
I'll tell you now, that's a human. Well, Doctor,
One of the twins spoke. That slithering head made Vamez's skin crawl.
We don't have you to only use your eyes.
Yes, the other followed.
Use that brain and those tools we paid oh so much for. The Imperium wants surety.
Vamez couldn't take his eyes off of the human. The way he stood, the way his muscles casually came alight and flared for a moment, the way his eyes rolled over from one side of the room to the other, from one person to the next. He was faster, he was quicker, there was no other way to say it, no easier way to understand a human than that. There was electricity inside of him, and that electricity was starting to build up.
All right,
Vamez fumbled his words.
I'll do some basic health checks. Make sure no bombs are planted in his stomach, the regular. Please.
He showed the door of his small room to everyone.
This is a tiny place. I already barely have enough space on my own.
Wait a damn minute,
Oat huffed with anger.
I ain't leaving this damn thing.
Stars, if anything needs to leave, it's you.
Vamez had dealt with the infamous Oat more times than he cared to remember.
Sometimes I'm surprised you can fit through the doors here in the first place.
All right,
one of the snakes hissed.
Let us get you paid, and let us have the doctor do his work. We'll leave 2 guards posted at the door, with many more outside. Let us handle business in the interim.
Thank you.
Vamez bowed, his eyes still on the human. He wasn't even sure if he actually wanted them to leave. Slowly, the crowds shuffled out, and eventually it was only Vamez, the dreaded human, and 2 mute, massive guards, who Vamez was sure, after careful observation, were more brain-dead robots than actual creatures. Another one of the Imperium's litany of horrors.
Okay,
Vamez looked at his hands. The human stood in the room like an ominous totem, unmoving and with a face carved out of wood.
I can make this quick, all right? I'm not really like all of them. I'm in the same spot you are.
He pointed to the enclosed cell-like room and gave a hapless shrug. I know. Vamez jumped. He hadn't in the slightest prepared himself to hear reply. The human's voice was steely and slow, and he began walking over to one of the tables, hands still bound and movement careful. I could tell.
You could, tell?
He was at a complete loss for himself, stumbling backwards and tripping over wheels and tables, trying not to send himself into an uncontrolled panic. The guards, on the other hand, seemed as careless as ever. Naturally. The human sat on the table, still looking around and showing zero signs of any aggression. Go ahead, then.
Go ahead?
Make sure I don't have a bomb in my stomach.
Oh.
He snapped back into action, thankful that his body was so naturally acclimated to his job that it required little actual thought from himself. He moved about deftly, gathering his electronics and quickly marking off one test after another. The entire time, the human sat obediently, casually watching Vamez work and relenting to whatever movement of limb or body was required of him. Vamez tried not to think too hard on the matter, yet whenever some of his machines picked up on the definitive marker of humans, on that insane implementation of human biology, he couldn't help but hesitate. What is it, Doctor? There was a strange caring to the human's voice.
It's,
He rubbed his bottom 2 hands together nervously.
Just, that electricity. It's not something that's common.
It's unique to Earth.
Yes, so I have heard.
Silence prevailed for a while, and Vamez was beginning to hate the feeling of the human's eyes on him. They were relentless, and they were without a doubt perceptive. Do you want to know something, Doctor? He wasn't sure if he was.
All right.
This electricity confuses you, and to tell you the truth, it had confused us humans for eons too. No one knew of Earth's history, let alone of humans themselves. He took a deep breath.
Oh?
It's true. For the longest time we thought it was just the way nature had to be, the only way that any sort of intelligence could appear. The biologist in Vamez laughed automatically.
Oh, well, that is certainly not the case.
We know that now, the human laughed back, making Vamez feel terribly confused and uneasy. We just didn't understand the power inside of us. We couldn't see the gift we had, Doctor. Vamez turned around to grab something from a table, and he stopped above his litany of tools, hands hovering as his mind worked in circles.
Oh?
Curiosity was a gnawing, relentless trait of his race.
Gift?
Yes. The matter-of-fact tone made him sound much older than Vamez now knew him to be. There was a somberness to it, a heaviness that comes only with foresight. We are chosen, Vamez. He twitched slightly at hearing his name.
Chosen?
That's right. He tapped his fingers on the table, his nervous nature taking control.
I don't understand.
We didn't either, for the longest time. He spoke like he didn't want to speak, but needed to. There was a silent urgency, a sense of gravity and importance that was making Vamez unable to remain calm. But that's all going to change now.
What?
Don't worry. I'll try to make sure you're okay.
Wait, I don't
Before anything else could be said, Vamez heard the familiar steps of Maleth treading down the stairs. He turned quickly and saw the beast open the door between the guards, a new and expensive suit adorning his thick fur.
Hello, Doctor.
Vamez blinked and tried to keep his raging thoughts in line.
Maleth!
A gnarly, toothy grin overtook the horrible beast.
I think you are done now, Doctor.
He was looking at the human, and it was obvious that he liked what he saw.
The arena is calling.
Vamez had been able to hear the slow build-up of a crowd on the other side of the asteroid for a while. Now it was easy to see that more creatures than ever before had gathered on their small rock of entertainment.
Well,
Vamez's hands slumped beside him.
I guess I'm done then. The human has nothing unusual about them. Well, let me get that straight. There are many unusual things about them, but that is just humans.
Well, then.
Maleth's voice was filled with pride and expectation. Each word seemed to spill out like blood already flowing from the arena.
Time for the show.
The grand arena boomed. Its great stone pillars and epic decorated arcs glistened against the background of the populous planet. Banners and lights, showers of drinks, and yells of excited denizens took over the fabricated atmosphere air. It was a mix of history and uncapped full-frontal modernity. The arena floor was dust and mud, and its walls were ancient stones picked from the galaxy's most hardened rocks. The structure was a grand oval, reaching out into the abysmal ends of the asteroid, almost bleeding out into the dark night of space and stars. Surrounding this historical oddity, encompassing her like a suffocating blanket, was every smattering of tech available. Spaceships buzzed and puttered above and around the asteroid. Billboards, fantastic screens, and flashing, dazzling lights overtook the eyes and shoved incredible pictures into them. The main planet circled behind and showed nothing but horizon and hilltop of sprawling, crawling metropolis. It was packed out. Everybody from all corners of the Imperium gathered to watch what bloodshed might be reaped from a human. How much would it take to kill one? What could it stand against? All of the rumors would finally end, and that's how it was advertised. The universe's great mystery, finally unraveled. Maleth sat in the holy box, a spot dedicated only for those working in or directly with the Imperium's royals, or in this case, a royal themselves. A true rarity, as the Holy Family almost never left their various temples. As boss of the Grand Arena, Maleth had to make sure that all went exactly as planned.
Holy Princess.
He bowed before the hundreds-of-year-old, regaled and pomped princess, fourth daughter to the sacred lady herself. Having such an important and divine figure inside of the arena was a great honor.
We have prepared for you today a show that shall never be matched again among the stars.
The princess was a stringy blue alien. Her face sagged with the immense weight of staved-off medically muted time, and every inch of her shriveled skin was adorned with either white, curling tattoos or fantastic gems and jewels of grandeur. Her voice and motions were almost flung out from her, as if everything she did was a spit, a guttural reaction to the dirt and filth around her.
Let it go!
She waved and spoke in a horribly shrill pitch. The crowd of aliens screamed with excitement at her announcement to begin.
Let it go, finally! Let it go! Let it go!
Of course, my holiness.
He bowed and smiled, twirling a hand behind him to start the event.
Of course.
Lights finally collapsed towards the arena. All extra signs, sounds, advertisements, and distractions halted instantly. Every screen and board now showed angles of the arena. Every creature sat ready and waiting. The place stopped and became tense, became ready. Maleth ran up to a platform before the holy box, roaring into a mic with endless, bountiful pride.
Citizens!
His voice scratched across the arena. It poured into the far reaches of space. He was loud, he was excited, and he was epic. The time had finally come.
Today, after dozens of great shows, as you all are always used to, we move on to the main event, the captivating moment that we have all been waiting for.
He dramatically gestured down towards the center of the arena, spotlights following with the spinning flare. There the human, no longer bound or chained, no longer restricted, arose slowly, small laser gun in hand.
The human!
The place erupted, frothing at the mouth and brimming with a lust for new exotic violence.
Today, our chosen champion is given only a pistol. Now let us see what this human is capable of!
The arena suddenly transformed. Small walls jutted out from the ground and formed a sort of maze, a collection of pockets and spaces where someone or something could hide from the human. The attendees got a perfect glimpse of everything from their angles and cameras. Only the human was left in the dark. From the edges of the walls, holes opened up, and slinking, screaming monstrosities emerged. Terrible nightmares of claws, teeth, talons, and whipping tails. All of it was extravagant. It was over the top and exciting. Everything except the human. In the center of it all, he sat motionless, still as a statue and seemingly content as one too. He did nothing. While being introduced, he'd decided to sit down cross-legged, hands on his legs and eyes closed, and now the beasts were closing in. A strange worry came across the crowd, none more so than Maleth. As they watched the humans sit and do nothing, they became worried that humans might not be all that they're cracked up to be. Maybe this human was scared and just waiting to die. Maybe all of the rumors were just that, rumors.
What is it doing?
One of the showrunners asked Maleth from behind him, obvious worry in her voice. He growled,
I don't know.
The moment of truth came soon enough. One of the killers, a six-legged, biting little demon, turned from a corner and saw an open corridor towards the human. All of the cameras focused in. Everyone hushed. A knife's edge was at the throat of the whole Imperium. The time had come. It screamed and snarled, breaking out into a sprint and bounding at ridiculous speeds. Maleth tightened his fists. He could hear the princess lean in curiously from her chair. It was all happening so fast. Everyone was watching. Everyone was entranced. Then, without as much as a flinch, the human just smiled. The beast jumped. Everyone's hearts pulsed. It was right upon him, and all of the lights had suddenly snapped off.
What?
Maleth stood up with a jolt. Every burning spotlight, gigantic flat screen, and flashing, pulsing attraction, they were all off. The grand arena was in grand darkness.
Is this part of the show?
The princess creaked.
On with it! On with it!
The lights quickly snapped back on. People screamed and clamored to see what happened.
Stars.
Maleth leaned forward over his box.
What in the...
Every beast, all of them in every corner of the arena, they were all dead. Each one had what looked to be one precise shot through their skull. Not a sound or even a muzzle flash had shown in the darkness. In mere seconds, every beast had been slain, and, to the horror of Maleth, the human was nowhere to be seen. The crowd became alight with unease and questions. Spotlights searched all around. TVs showed one angle and another. Then, finally, after a few seconds of confusion, someone yelled. All attention shifted instantly. The human had finally been located, far off from the center where they started, right on the edge of the arena and on top of one of the walls. He was closest to Maleth, right up against the shielding and looking up at them. The crowd cheered, and Maleth wanted to feel some slight relief that the show would go on, but the human, it was looking at them. It was staring straight at them, and something in its eyes spooked him. Maleth shook off the fear and took back the microphone.
What a victory!
He spoke loud and tried to hide the insecurity in his voice.
Well, that was quick, but worry not. This next
Maleth lost his voice. He trailed off as the human raised his hand, motioning that they wanted to speak. A slight commotion occurred behind Maleth, but quickly he relented and told them to play the audio out loud. Listen to me. The human's voice stormed across the crowd, all who reacted with violent, pulsing love. I want you all to know that I don't want to do this, but forests can only grow healthy when a fire cleanses the blight and age. And this forest, this place you have here, it is sick, horribly sick. Maleth coughed, hesitating at the mic.
That was a great victory, human. But no, you are not done yet.
You're right. I'm not done yet. His voice was cold, ripping steel. But I'm afraid that it is time these theatrics stop. He walked closer to the shielding around the arena. As he stepped up to it, the blue phasmic shroud of its effect became more visible.
Human,
Maleth spoke sternly.
That shield is some of the strongest in the Imperium. I promise you, there is no escaping it.
The human moved slowly, and he calmly raised his palm and placed it against the pulsing tech. My name is Adam. A memory gripped Maleth like it was a snapping serpent. He saw Vamez, worried and serious, telling him a strange exotic fact. The humans have electricity inside them. Maleth became sick to his stomach. Suddenly, Adam's eyes glowed just a little. It was faint and minuscule, but it might as well have been an eruption of lightning. Then the shielding collapsed under his hands. It was like tension leaving netting, and its blue edges sucked back away from Adam and disappeared into the walls, leaving nothing between him and them. I am sorry. His voice was still connected to the speakers, and it boomed over the now rabid and desperate screams of the crowd. You all don't understand the harm you've caused others. The lights flickered again, and the human was gone. Maleth was twisted and wrought with every fear, phobia, and dread that ever haunted his nightmares. He turned towards the princess, who seemed still oblivious to her danger.
Guards!
Maleth screamed and shoved some of the ones next to him.
You must
A succession of shots rang out from the crowd, dropping the guards by Maleth and causing the others to unload their weapons into the direction of their origin. A quick firefight broke out, and Maleth hit the ground with his hands covering his head. The human seemed to always be in a different direction, and every time he fired out it was from another angle, a different cover that the guards didn't expect, and one by one they all dropped. It all paused. No more shots, no more deaths, just the screaming, flailing princess and Maleth. He stood up slowly, eerily coming face to face with the human who stood out in the crowd. Adam looked tall, smoking pistol by his side and demeanor stoic. He headed towards the box, movement unstoppable. Maleth looked around desperately for one of the dropped guns. Don't, Adam spoke curtly.
You're going to kill her!
He dived for a gun, but Adam just shot it out of his hands. Yes, I am. He came right up before the queen, who herself couldn't move or escape without help from her slaves and guards, all who had fled or died.
What beast is this?
Her shrill voice pierced Maleth's ears. Adam made no pomp of it. He simply raised his gun, arm straight and true, and fired twice, killing her instantly, her blue precious blood spewing out in puttering geysers. Maleth writhed with lack of belief. It had all fallen apart. Everything collapsed. All of his plans, his show, his life. One of the royals was dead on his watch. A royal hadn't died in centuries, and here one didn't just die, but was brutally, horrifically slain. He looked down at his hands, blinking and in shock. Adam lowered his gun slowly, turning his gaze towards Maleth. You know that I must kill you too, right?
What have you done?
His voice was a pitiful, sorrowed cry.
What have you done?
Adam nodded. A horrible thing, yes, but a necessary thing.
Stars! Stars! She was a royal! A royal!
One of many. He walked closer to Maleth, staring over the once proud, elegant creature. I suspect my show here is going to make tracking down the rest much harder.
Why?
He shook his head, crying into his hands.
Just why?
Adam knelt down beside him, eyes somehow caring amidst it all. Your doctor had us humans right, Maleth. We humans have electricity inside of us. It pulses in our veins and powers our mind. It is a gift, Maleth, but it is also a horrible responsibility. Maleth heard more guards getting closer, and Adam too quickly looked up to see how near they were. The moment we realized our power was the moment we also realized what needed to be done. He stood back up, pistol tight in hand.
You will die.
Hatred had finally found Maleth. He spat out his words amongst his tears.
The Imperium is made up of billions upon billions. The royals will never fall to one man.
Well, he looked up from the asteroid right into the night sky, eyeing a small, faint cluster of lights moving their way. I suppose you missed the part where I said we.
You all will fail. It is impossible. Impossible!
Adam brought his eyes back down towards him, and in them Maleth saw tears. They were small and welled at the side of each iris, but true and deep. Adam nodded, a pained grimace finding his chin. Maybe. He raised his gun. But that's the thing you're going to have to learn about humans. It's not impossible unless we try. He shot Maleth twice, killing him instantly. Adam sighed deeply, looking back to the 3 small rickety ships heading his way. It was small, but it was the start of something he'd been planning for a long, long time, and it was finally coming into motion. He took a deep breath, collecting in him the energy, the passion, the electricity to carry out what must be done. Time for the show.